The fog that shrouded London on that November evening in 1891 seemed to muffle not only sound, but reason itself, transforming the familiar streets into a labyrinth of shadows and whispered secrets. I had been cataloguing my notes from a recent consultation involving a missing inheritance when the urgent rap at our Baker Street door announced the arrival of Inspector Lestrade, his usually composed demeanor replaced by an expression of profound bewilderment. Holmes, who had spent the better part of the afternoon in contemplation of a chemical experiment involving what appeared to be a rather alarming purple solution, looked up from his apparatus with that familiar spark of interest that invariably preceded our most intriguing cases. The transformation was immediate and complete, from languid scholar to alert predator in the space of a heartbeat. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Lestrade began without preamble, removing his damp coat with trembling hands. "I come to you with a case that has left Scotland Yard completely baffled. It concerns Sir Septimus Rowbotham of Cheyne Walk, a gentleman of methodical habits and considerable wealth, whose locked study was robbed last evening under circumstances that defy all rational explanation." Holmes gestured toward the chair beside the fire, his keen grey eyes already fixed upon our visitor with unwavering attention. "Pray be seated, Inspector. The fog has clearly served as accomplice to some mischief. Tell us everything, omitting no detail, however trivial it may appear." Lestrade settled himself gratefully before the warmth of our hearth, his hands still bearing traces of a peculiar blue stain that spoke of hasty investigation work. "Sir Septimus is a collector of Eastern curiosities, Mr. Holmes, a man of 70 years who maintains the most rigid of daily routines. Yesterday evening he retired to his study at precisely 8 o'clock, as is his custom, to review his accounts. The room was secured from within, the windows bolted against the fog, and a fire burning low in the grate." "And yet," Holmes murmured, steepling his fingers, "something occurred to disturb this peaceful scene." "Indeed, sir. At approximately 8:30, the household staff, his daughter, Mrs. Lydia Harcourt, and the servants, heard Sir Septimus engaged in conversation with someone within the locked study. Low voices, they reported, though they could not make out the words clearly through the heavy oak door." I leaned forward, intrigued despite myself. "Surely a visitor had been admitted?" Lestrade shook his head emphatically. "That's precisely the mystery, Dr. Watson. No one had entered the house that evening. The front door remained locked and chained, the servants' entrance secured, and every window on the ground floor bolted fast, yet the conversation continued for nearly 15 minutes. Holmes's eyes had taken on that distant quality that indicated his mind was already assembling the pieces of the puzzle. "Continue, Inspector. What transpired next?" "At 8:45, there came a cry from within the study, followed by the sound of a heavy fall. When the family forced the door with a poker from the kitchen, they discovered Sir Septimus unconscious upon the carpet, a considerable lump upon his head, and his private safe standing wide open, its contents removed. A leather-bound ledger containing his business accounts, a packet of correspondence tied with green ribbon, and most significantly, a blue stone of considerable value, the Murshidabad star, which Sir Septimus claimed was worth several £1,000s. Holmes rose and moved to the window, gazing out into the fog-shrouded street. "And Sir Septimus's account of these events?" Lestrade's expression grew even more perplexed. "Here, Mr. Holmes, the case takes its most extraordinary turn. Sir Septimus insists that his only companion in the room was his grandson's toy, an American novelty called a talking doll that his daughter had recently purchased. He claims that as he worked at his desk, making some remark about figures that wouldn't balance, a voice near his ear whispered, 'Then tally them again.' I could not suppress a skeptical laugh. Surely the old gentleman was mistaken, or perhaps suffering from some form of hallucination. That was my initial thought, Dr. Watson, until I interviewed the parlour maid, a young woman named Jane. She swore that on the previous evening, while dusting the study, she too heard the doll speak when she leaned close to it. 'It whispers when you bend to it,' were her exact words, though she begged me not to tell her mistress for fear of losing her position. Holmes turned from the window, his face grave with concentration. "What physical evidence did you observe at the scene, Inspector?" "Several curious items, sir. Upon the brass handle of the safe, I found a smear of what you've correctly identified as Prussian blue, the marking compound used by engineers and machinists. There was a burnt lucifer upon the carpet, its tip curled in an unusual manner, as if held too long to a hot surface. A pinch of fine sawdust was scattered across Sir Septimus's desk, though no carpentry work had been done in the house for months. And in the fireplace ashes, we discovered a small piece of crumpled tinfoil, blackened by heat." Holmes nodded slowly, his fingers drumming against the windowsill. "And the suspects?" "We have one with both motive and opportunity," Lestrade replied grimly. "Mrs. Harcourt's brother-in-law, Mr. Basil Harcourt, a gentleman of expensive tastes and limited means, known at several gaming establishments for his mounting debts. He visited Malden House 2 nights prior, had harsh words with Sir Septimus in that very study, and departed in evident anger. His alibi? Airtight, I'm afraid. He was observed at the Swan and Lyre Tavern from 7 until well past midnight, with a dozen witnesses to vouch for his presence. The timing makes his involvement impossible." Holmes returned to his chair, reaching for his clay pipe with deliberate movements. "Any other persons of interest?" "Only the German toy-maker who delivered the doll, a Herr Otto Gruber. He called upon the house 3 weeks ago to present the toy, and returned once more to inquire whether it was performing satisfactorily, as he put it. An eccentric fellow, but elderly and seemingly harmless." Holmes struck a match and applied it to his pipe, drawing thoughtfully as the smoke curled upward to mingle with the fog pressing against our windows. "Inspector, you present us with a most intriguing combination of elements. A locked room, an impossible conversation, a safe opened without force, and a child's toy that appears to possess the faculty of speech. Tell Sir Septimus that we shall call upon him tomorrow morning to examine the scene." As Lestrade departed into the fog-shrouded night, I turned to my companion with barely concealed excitement. "Well, Holmes, what do you make of it? Surely even you cannot believe that a mechanical doll engaged in conversation with Sir Septimus?" My friend smiled enigmatically, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "My dear Watson, I have learned never to dismiss any account, however fantastic, until I have examined the evidence myself. But I will say this. If a toy did indeed whisper back to Sir Septimus Robotham, then we are dealing with either the most ingenious mechanical device ever created, or something far more sinister masquerading as a child's plaything." He rose and began gathering his investigative materials: magnifying glass, measuring tape, and various chemical testing vials. "The game, as they say, is afoot, and I suspect that before this mystery is resolved, we shall discover that the art of ventriloquism extends far beyond the music halls of London." As I prepared for sleep that evening, I found myself haunted by the image of a child's toy, whispering secrets in a locked room, while outside our windows, the fog continued its eternal dance through the gas-lit streets of London, carrying with it the promise of revelations yet to come. The following morning dawned with that peculiar clarity that follows London fog, the air crisp and sharp as Holmes and I prepared for our journey to Cheyne Walk. I found my companion already dressed and examining several mechanical components at the breakfast table, his long fingers manipulating what appeared to be tiny gears and springs with the delicacy of a surgeon. "Ah, Watson," he observed without lifting his eyes, "I perceive you have returned to your old razor this morning, though the haste with which you employed it suggests either eagerness for our investigation or concern over my early rising. The small nick upon your jaw, treated with alum, tells its own tale." He set down a miniature cylinder no larger than a thimble. "I've been corresponding by telegram with a colleague at the British Museum regarding these American talking dolls. The mechanism is far more sophisticated than one might suppose, operating through wax cylinders not unlike Edison's phonograph, but ingeniously miniaturized." I poured coffee and settled opposite him, noting the intense concentration with which he studied the components. What significance might this have for our case? Consider, my dear fellow, that such devices can be modified by someone with sufficient mechanical knowledge to record new messages or alter existing ones. The voice that Sir Septimus heard may not have been the original recording at all. Holmes gathered the components into a small leather case. But we must examine the scene before drawing conclusions. Our hansom carried us through the awakening streets to Cheyne Walk, where Malden House presented a handsome Georgian facade of red brick and limestone. Inspector Lestrade met us at the door, his expression bearing the weary look of a man who had spent a sleepless night wrestling with impossible circumstances. "Sir Septimus insists on being present during your examination," Lestrade informed us as we were admitted by a nervous parlour maid. "His daughter, Mrs. Harcourt, is most anxious about his condition." Mrs. Lydia Harcourt proved to be a woman of perhaps 40 years, possessed of that practical intelligence Holmes often found valuable in witnesses. Her anxious demeanour suggested genuine concern rather than duplicity, and she received us in the morning room with evident relief. "Mr. Holmes, I confess myself completely bewildered by these events," she began. "My father is a man of methodical habits and sound mind. If he claims the doll spoke to him, then I must believe something extraordinary occurred." Sir Septimus himself, despite the bandage adorning his silver head, maintained a dignified bearing. "Mr. Holmes, I'm a man of business who has dealt in facts and figures for 5 decades. When I tell you that the doll spoke to me, I mean precisely that. The voice was clear, distinct, and entirely unexpected." Holmes settled into a chair positioned to observe both our host and the study beyond. "Describe the exact sequence of events, omitting nothing, however trivial." The old gentleman closed his eyes, concentrating. I had been working perhaps 20 minutes when I remarked aloud about discrepancies in my ledger. Immediately, a voice near my left shoulder whispered, "Then tally them again." I turned, expecting to see someone, but found only the doll upon the shelf where Lydia had placed it. What occurred next? I approached the toy, thinking some spring had activated. As I bent closer, it spoke again. The numbers dance when watched too closely. The words carried a peculiar accent, neither entirely English nor foreign. Sir Septimus's voice grew strained. I returned to my desk, thoroughly unsettled. Minutes later, I heard footsteps behind me, though the room appeared empty. The doll had somehow moved from the shelf to the table beside the safe. Holmes's eyes had taken on that distant quality, indicating rapid mental calculation. "Continue." As I stared at the doll in its new position, it spoke once more. "The star shines brightest in darkness." I realized someone else was indeed present, though invisible to me. I turned toward the safe to secure the Murshidabad star, when something struck me from behind. Holmes rose and moved toward the study. "Inspector, I believe it is time we examined this remarkable scene. The truth, I suspect, lies not in supernatural ventriloquism, but in the very human art of deception most cleverly applied." As we entered the panelled study, Holmes began his methodical survey, his keen eyes cataloguing every detail with that precision which had solved so many seemingly impossible mysteries. The study revealed its secrets reluctantly, yielding each clue only to Holmes's methodical scrutiny. He began at the door itself, his magnifying glass hovering over the lock mechanism where faint scratches marked the brass strike plate, as though some fine implement had worked repeatedly against the metal. The key lay upon a silver tray nearby, its surface bearing an almost imperceptible smear of the same blue substance that stained the safe's handle. Moving to the windows, Holmes tested each latch systematically, confirming Lestrade's assessment that all remained securely bolted from within. Yet his keen eyes detected something the inspector had missed. Minute scratches upon one window sill, fresh enough to catch the morning light at precisely the correct angle. However, the undisturbed dust and spider webs in the corners confirmed that no entry had been made through these portals. At the mahogany desk, Holmes knelt to examine the scattered sawdust more closely. "Observe, Watson, how this powder forms an almost perfect semicircle, as though brushed from some small object moved in a deliberate arc." He collected samples with tweezers, noting the exceptionally fine grain. Not from carpentry work, but from precision boring, I should venture. The type employed in delicate mechanical operations. The safe commanded his next attention, its brass handle still bearing that curious blue stain. "Prussian blue," Holmes murmured, carefully scraping a sample onto a glass slide. "A marking compound favored by engineers and precision mechanics, most illuminating when found upon a gentleman's private safe." He examined the lock mechanism itself, finding no signs of forcing, yet discovering something that made him pause thoughtfully. "The combination was known to our intruder," he observed. "Yet see here, Watson." He indicated tiny metal filings caught in the lock's crevices. "Someone has been practicing with this mechanism, learning its particular quirks and resistances." Holmes then moved to the fireplace, where he retrieved the burnt lucifer with delicate precision. Note the peculiar curl of the match head, Lestrade. This was not struck for illumination, but pressed against a heated metal surface until it ignited from contact alone. He sifted through the cold ashes, recovering the crumpled tinfoil and smoothing it carefully. The metal bore faint impressions and a peculiar sheen that seemed to fascinate him, but it was his examination of the doll that yielded the most significant discovery. Holmes lifted the porcelain-faced toy with the reverence of an archaeologist handling ancient artifacts, turning it slowly in the morning light. The mechanism appeared standard at first glance, with its key-wound cylinder system and small grill for sound emission. "Watson, steady this while I examine its construction more thoroughly." As I held the doll, Holmes produced a small tool and began probing what appeared to be a seam in the toy's base. With a soft click, a hidden panel opened, revealing a cavity that was clearly not part of the original design. "Most enlightening," Holmes said, withdrawing a tiny cylinder no larger than my thumb. "Our innocent plaything has been modified by someone of considerable mechanical skill. This secondary cylinder explains Sir Septimus's mysterious conversation, though not yet the method by which it was activated." He wound the doll's original mechanism, and the familiar, tinny voice emerged. "Good morning, little one. I am your friend and companion." But when he inserted the hidden cylinder and manipulated a concealed switch, the voice that emerged was entirely different, speaking in cultured English tones. "The numbers dance when watched too closely." Lestrade started visibly. "Good heavens, Mr. Holmes, that's precisely what Sir Septimus described." Holmes carefully replaced both cylinders and closed the hidden compartment. "Indeed, Inspector, but this mechanical ventriloquism, ingenious though it may be, still does not explain our locked room mystery." At this moment, the parlour-maid Jane appeared at the doorway, summoned by Mrs. Harcourt to provide tea. Holmes immediately engaged her in conversation about Herr Gruber's return visit. "He was most particular about the doll's placement," Jane recalled nervously. "Said it must sit just so upon the shelf, and asked me to hold the door slightly ajar while he made adjustments. There was humming and tiny clicking sounds, and he requested a glass of water, which he set upon the desk corner." Holmes nodded thoughtfully, then began examining the shelf itself with renewed interest. His fingers traced the woodwork until they discovered a small hole, no larger than a pencil lead, drilled through the back panel. Fresh wood shavings still clung to its edges. "Gentlemen," Holmes announced, straightening with evident satisfaction, "we have established that human agency was indeed at work in this room. The question now becomes not whether someone was present, but how they managed to be both here and elsewhere simultaneously." His eyes held that familiar gleam that preceded his most brilliant deductions, though I knew he would reveal nothing more until all pieces of the puzzle lay before him. Holmes pressed his eye to the tiny perforation and examined the wall's construction with renewed intensity. The sound of his knuckle against the paneling returned hollow, suggesting a cavity beyond. Moving to examine the adjoining room, we discovered that the study shared its wall with a modest storage chamber filled with household linens and disused nursery items. "Mrs. Harcourt, when was this room last accessed?" Holmes inquired, noting immediately that a large wardrobe had been recently repositioned. Fresh scratches upon the floor and a small pile of sawdust swept hastily into the corner provided eloquent testimony to recent activity. "I had it cleaned perhaps a month ago," she replied, "though I cannot say when anyone might have entered since." Holmes produced his thin steel probe and inserted it through the hole we had discovered. When it emerged on the storage room side, concealed behind the displaced wardrobe, the tip carried traces of the same blue substance and pale wood fibers. "Someone has taken considerable pains to prepare this vantage point," he observed, kneeling behind the furniture where knee impressions in the dust revealed prolonged occupation. But it was his examination of the wall itself that yielded the most significant discovery. What appeared to be a harmless join in the wainscoting proved, under pressure from his penknife, to be a cunningly concealed panel. The wood beneath bore the fresher hue of recent cutting, and with neat pressure at a knot in the timber, an inch-wide strip yielded like a sprung latch, revealing a narrow cavity that smelled faintly of oil and india rubber. "Observe, Watson, how our obliging Herr Gruber insisted upon the doll's exact position," Holmes said, his voice carrying that note of satisfaction that indicated major progress. "The aperture he contrived aligns perfectly with this concealed passage." Within the hidden space, Holmes's lantern revealed a sophisticated array of equipment that spoke to meticulous planning. A small bottle labeled in German script bore the deep blue stain we had encountered repeatedly, while beside it lay a coil of silk line so fine it might escape casual notice, yet possessed of that whispering toughness that would support considerable weight. Most tellingly, a tiny brass pulley remained tack-nailed to a wooden slat, positioned to redirect the line's path. A mechanism from this point, through the hole, around some convenient anchor in the study, and attached to the doll's clothing would translate a gentle pull into the elegant progression Sir Septimus observed, Holmes explained, tracing the probable path with string. The toy's apparent movement from shelf to table becomes not supernatural, but merely mechanical. Yet even as Holmes demonstrated this portion of the mystery, I detected in his manner the restless energy that indicated larger questions remained. He moved to examine the safe more closely, this time focusing not on the lock mechanism but on the skirting beneath. His persistence was rewarded when a section of molding yielded to reveal another carefully concealed opening. This one positioned at knee height and dressed with the hasty efficiency of a practiced burglar rather than a joiner's careful craft. "By this route," Holmes murmured, withdrawing a steel rod ending in a small hooked implement, its tip clotted with blue marking compound, "our intruder could manipulate the safe handle once the combination was determined and extract the lighter contents. The ledger and correspondence would pass easily through such an aperture." "But Holmes," I protested, "this still suggests the presence of someone within the room itself. How could these operations be conducted from the storage chamber?" "An excellent observation, Watson, which brings us to the most ingenious aspect of this entire enterprise." Holmes moved to examine a tasseled cord hanging from a ceiling vent, then the back of Sir Septimus's chair, and finally the carpet behind the desk, where a faint crescent of sifted dust marked the floor. A weighted object, suspended and triggered by the same line system that moved the doll, could deliver a stunning blow without requiring the perpetrator's physical presence in the room. Lestrade gave a low whistle of amazement. "Then the room was never actually entered during the commission of the crime?" "Precisely, Inspector. The deed was accomplished entirely from the adjacent chamber, with the door bolt pushed home afterward using a spring steel slip inserted through the doorframe. Your scratches on the strike plate are the signature of such an implement." At this juncture, Mrs. Harcourt provided information that cast our investigation in an entirely new light. "Gentlemen, I have recalled something that may prove significant. 3 days past, I observed a workman in the courtyard below, ostensibly repairing loose mortar in the garden wall. When I inquired, he claimed authorization from the landlord's agent, though I later learned no such repairs had been requested." Holmes's eyes sharpened with immediate interest. "Describe this individual." "A man of perhaps 50 years, wearing typical tradesman's attire and carrying appropriate tools. What struck me as peculiar was his accent when he spoke. Neither entirely English nor foreign, but something between the two." Sir Septimus started visibly at this description. "That accent, Lydia, matches precisely what I heard from the Dole. The same distinctive inflection." Yet even as these revelations accumulated, Holmes seemed increasingly thoughtful rather than satisfied. "While we have established the mechanical means," he said slowly, "the question of motive grows more complex. Inspector, you mentioned Mr. Basil Harcourt's financial difficulties and his quarrel with Sir Septimus, a compelling case in the conventional sense. Indeed, Mr. Holmes, the man was desperate, had argued violently with Sir Septimus, and possessed intimate knowledge of the household." Holmes nodded gravely. "And yet, Lestrade, consider the precise nature of this crime. The elaborate mechanical preparations, the sophisticated understanding of both the house's construction and advanced clockwork principles, the theatrical deployment of multiple coordinated devices. These are not the impulsive acts of a desperate gambler, but the carefully orchestrated moves of someone who delights in the construction of insoluble puzzles." He paused, his gaze returning to the ingenious panel system. "Mr. Harcourt's alibi may be unshakable because he was never intended to be the true perpetrator, merely the convenient suspect. We are dealing with a mind that thinks not in terms of simple theft, but of intellectual challenge and mechanical artistry." As we prepared to depart, Holmes's expression carried that peculiar absorption I had observed before his most brilliant deductions. "There remains the question of how the safe combination was obtained," he said quietly, examining once more the key with its telltale blue smear. "It was neither guessed nor discovered by chance, Watson. It was learned through patient observation and methodical preparation. Our mysterious workman has been far busier than mere mortar repair would suggest." The game, as Holmes was fond of saying, was indeed afoot, but I sensed we had uncovered only the visible portion of a conspiracy whose true dimensions remained hidden in the London fog. Holmes was not yet satisfied with our examination of the interior and requested that we survey the grounds before departing. Leading us through the rear corridor to the courtyard, he immediately focused upon the garden wall where Mrs. Harcourt had observed the mysterious workman. The irregular patch of fresh mortar stood several feet above the paving stones, and Holmes stepped upon a convenient stone roller to examine it more closely with his magnifying glass. "Observe, Watson," he said, indicating a faint circular impression in the mortar before it had fully set. "Something metallic was temporarily affixed here, leaving this distinctive mark. The rim bore traces of the same blue compound we had encountered repeatedly, as though a metal collar or bracket had been pressed into the wet mortar and later removed. Near the base of the wall, partially concealed beneath fallen leaves, Holmes discovered a fragment of what appeared to be gutta-percha tubing, flattened at one end as if it had been pinched by some mechanical clamp. Standing beneath the study window, Holmes conducted a curious experiment. Speaking a single word in low tones through the recovered tube fragment, he demonstrated how the sound carried with remarkable clarity through the building's wooden framework. From within the study came the faint echo of his own voice, so subtle that one might easily dismiss it as imagination, yet unmistakably present to the attentive ear. "Another component of our mechanical orchestra," Holmes observed, slipping the tube into his pocket. "Sound, like motion, can be directed and amplified through ingenious application of physical principles." Before departing Malden House, Holmes returned briefly to the storage chamber for one final examination. Threading a length of string through the perforation behind the shelf, he measured distances with the precision of a surveyor, proving to his satisfaction some calculation he declined to share. The brass pulley received particular attention, as did a minute shred of fibrous material he detected at the point where the silk line had been secured. This fragment disappeared into his waistcoat with the swift, secretive motion I had observed countless times when Holmes discovered evidence of particular significance. Our hansom carried us northeast to Clerkenwell, that quarter of London where skilled artisans and precision craftsmen maintain their workshops among the narrow streets and ancient buildings. Lestrade had efficiently obtained Herr Gruber's address from the invoice found at Malden House, leading us to a modest establishment in Newcastle Court. The shop presented a bow window filled with an appealing display of tin soldiers, mechanical windmills, and other ingenious toys arranged upon green baize. A thin youth with ink-stained fingers informed us that Herr Gruber maintained lodgings at the rear of the premises but would not return until afternoon. The lad's manner grew considerably more forthcoming when Holmes complimented the exquisite finish of a tiny brass escapement displayed upon the counter, whereupon he revealed that the old gentleman had recently entertained a visitor who spoke English with peculiar precision, as though carefully selecting each word. "This visitor made purchases?" Holmes inquired with studied casualness. "Indeed, sir. 2 dozen blank wax cylinders and a bottle of special oil for the precision lathe. He paid in gold sovereigns and gave his name as Mr. Marr." Holmes exchanged a meaningful glance with Lestrade, who dutifully noted the name in his pocketbook. Meanwhile, Holmes had moved to examine a workbench visible behind the shop proper. His keen nose detected the familiar scent of the blue marking compound, and lifting a small bottle, he displayed it to Lestrade with quiet satisfaction. The German label matched precisely that we had discovered in the concealed cavity at Malden House. Access to Gruber's modest lodging revealed a tidy chamber with narrow bed, traveling trunk, and an improvised lathe clamped to a small table. The trunk's leather surface bore a recent scrape that had lifted away the top layer, revealing beneath a shipping stencil reading H. March & Co.'s, Gas Fitters Supplies, Saffron Hill. Holmes examined this marking with particular interest, running his finger along the impressed letters. "Our toy maker," he murmured to me, "appears familiar with the tools and supplies of the gas fitting trade." The vigilant landlady, a sharp-eyed woman wrapped in a woolen shawl, appeared to defend her lodger's reputation. Herr Gruber, she assured us, was a gentleman of punctual habits and gentle manner, troubled only by a persistent cough in damp weather. His recent visitors had been limited to the careful-speaking gentleman and a messenger boy from the Britannia Theatre in Hoxton, who had delivered 2 small parcels wrapped in oiled paper. The Britannia. Holmes's interest sharpened immediately. "What manner of parcels?" "Stage apparatus," the boy said. "Pulleys and silk lines, the sort used to make chairs fly across the stage in pantomimes. Hired by the week, according to the receipt." Lestrade nodded with evident satisfaction. "Stage machinery explains our mechanical arrangements perfectly, Mr. Holmes. Lines, pulleys, coordinated movements, all the apparatus of theatrical illusion." Holmes made no immediate reply, but his examination of the lathe's tool rest yielded a curl of blackened tinfoil, faintly embossed as though pressed against some textured surface. He balanced this fragment upon his palm, subjected it to careful olfactory analysis, and secreted it away with the same swift discretion he had displayed earlier. Our investigation next carried us to the Swan and Lyre, where Basil Harcourt's alibi awaited verification. The establishment proved typical of its kind, with smoke-stained walls and the comfortable disorder of a place where working men gathered for evening refreshment. The landlord swore readily to Harcourt's presence from 7 o'clock until near midnight, supported by 3 companions whose overlapping testimonies carried the ring of frequent repetition. Holmes listened with apparent patience, his gaze traveling idly about the room before settling upon the smoke-wreathed mirror behind the bar. The glass's angle, I noticed, provided a clear view of the street entrance, though Holmes made no comment upon this observation. He thanked the witnesses courteously and departed without challenge, leaving them somewhat deflated by the absence of dramatic confrontation they had evidently anticipated. Returning to our hansom, Lestrade could no longer contain his enthusiasm. "Well, Mr. Holmes, shall I set my men upon this Herr Gruber and his mysterious Mr. Marr? We have the workshop, the cylinders, the very marking compound, and connections to stage apparatus besides." "By all means pursue those avenues, Inspector," Holmes replied with characteristic mildness. "However, I would counsel patience regarding any precipitate arrests. Our criminal demonstrates artistry of a very high order, and such minds frequently provide, quite inadvertently, the means of their own exposure." "What aspects trouble you still?" I asked, unable to suppress my curiosity about the evidence he had so carefully collected and concealed. Holmes's smile carried that familiar blend of warmth and inscrutability. "There remains, my dear Watson, a subtle discord between what Sir Septimus reported hearing and what we ourselves observed from the modified doll. A refinement of accent, a particular inflection which may prove decisive when properly understood." He paused, his fingers steepled in contemplation. "And then there is the most intriguing question of how a safe combination becomes visible to someone who cannot see through solid metal." He directed our driver toward Saffron Hill and settled back into apparent repose, though I recognized the signs of intense mental activity beneath his composed exterior. Lestrade, convinced that arrest was imminent, busied himself with preliminary reports in his notebook. As for myself, I found my thoughts returning repeatedly to that fragment of tinfoil Holmes had examined with such interest, and to the peculiar way he had tested the sound transmission through the gutta-percha tube. Whatever pattern he was assembling from these diverse elements remained hidden from my understanding, though I sensed we approached some crucial revelation that would illuminate the entire mysterious affair. The afternoon fog was beginning to gather, as our hansom clattered through London's increasingly narrow streets, and I could not escape the feeling that somewhere in the city's labyrinthine passages, the true architect of these ingenious crimes was preparing for his next move in what had become a deadly serious game of wits. Our hansom carried us through the thickening afternoon fog to Saffron Hill, where the establishment of H. March & Company occupied a narrow building squeezed between ancient warehouses. The proprietor, a stout man whose leather apron bore decades of accumulated stains from the gas-fitting trade, emerged from his workshop at the sound of our entrance bell. Holmes's card and a brief explanation of our business transformed his initial wariness into professional cooperation. The shipping stencil fragment from Gruber's trunk proved immediately recognizable. "Aye, that's our work," the proprietor confirmed, adjusting wire-rimmed spectacles. "German gentleman brought in a traveling trunk 3 days past, needed brass corner reinforcements for delicate clock mechanisms he was transporting back to the continent. Spoke very careful English, as though translating each word before speaking it." Holmes examined several brass plates of the type described, noting their distinctive screw-hole patterns. "Did he purchase other supplies during his visit?" "Indeed, sir. A small bottle of our finest Prussian blue marking compound. Claimed it was unavailable on the continent in such concentrated form. Also requested a stethoscopic diaphragm, the sort we use for detecting gas leaks through noisy mains." The man gestured toward his workbench where metal filings and a partially used bottle of the blue compound provided silent testimony to recent activity. Holmes lifted the bottle, examining its contents with evident satisfaction. "This compound, when applied to metal, surfaces and then subjected to heat, leaves distinctive impressions, does it not?" "Certainly, sir. We use it for marking cut lines and taking quick impressions of damaged threads. Press a bit of tin foil against the marked surface, apply gentle heat to burn away the oil, and you've got a perfect negative impression, blackened but perfectly legible." The implications struck me immediately. Holmes, if someone applied this compound to the numbers of a safe combination, then pressed tinfoil against the dial after use. Precisely, Watson. The most frequently touched numbers would transfer their traces, revealing the combination through patient observation and systematic elimination. Holmes pocketed a sample of the compound. Combined with a stethoscopic diaphragm for detecting the lock's internal mechanisms, our criminal possessed all the tools necessary for safe cracking without force. Our investigation next led us to examine the theatrical connections more thoroughly. Holmes produced the minute fiber he had discovered in the study's concealed compartment, subjecting it to careful analysis under the gas fitter's magnifying apparatus. The material proved to be silk of unusual weave, dyed with theatrical crimson and interwoven with metallic threads of the type employed in stage costumery. Not the attire of a common workman or respectable tradesman, Holmes observed, but rather the elaborate finery one associates with pantomime productions or music hall performances. Our mysterious Mr. Marr begins to assume a more definite character. The proprietor confirmed that both Gruber and the careful-speaking gentleman had inquired about supplies suitable for creating acoustic effects, particularly the transmission of sound through solid structures. Stage work, they claimed, though the German seemed more interested in precision mechanics than theatrical spectacle. As we prepared to depart, a breathless messenger boy intercepted Lestrade with an urgent telegram. The inspector's face grew grave as he read. "Gruber's shop has been ransacked," he announced. "Neighbors heard a disturbance shortly after our visit. The premises are destroyed, the lathe smashed, and there are signs of hasty departure, though whether voluntary or otherwise remains unclear." Holmes received this intelligence with that peculiar stillness that indicated rapid mental calculation rather than surprise. Our adversary perceives the closing net and takes decisive action. The question becomes whether Herr Gruber was accomplice or unwitting tool, and whether his disappearance represents escape or elimination. The fog had thickened to an impenetrable wall as we returned toward the city center, transforming familiar streets into a maze of shadows and muffled sounds. Holmes maintained thoughtful silence, his fingers drumming complex rhythms against the hansom's window frame. "Inspector," he said finally, "I believe our investigation has reached a critical juncture. We face a criminal of unusual sophistication, one who combines mechanical genius with theatrical artistry and possesses the ruthless efficiency to eliminate inconvenient associates. The game has become deadly serious. What would you have us do, Mr. Holmes?" "Return to Baker Street and prepare for the next phase of our investigation. Our quarry has revealed himself to be a master of misdirection and mechanical illusion, but such elaborate deceptions invariably contain the seeds of their own exposure. Tomorrow, I believe, we shall discover whether we are hunting a brilliant criminal or being hunted by one." The hansom clattered through the fog-shrouded streets, carrying us toward whatever revelation awaited in the deepening London night, while somewhere in the city's labyrinthine passages, the true architect of these ingenious crimes prepared his next move in what had become a deadly game of intellectual chess. We returned to Baker Street through fog that seemed to press even into our sitting room, where Holmes immediately commenced those delicate experiments which, to the uninitiated, might appear mere trifling, yet invariably yielded profound insights. He warmed the blackened tinfoil fragment above a spirit lamp until faint ridges sprang into visibility, then laid it upon blotting paper and dusted the surface with powdered lamp black. Under his magnifying lens, a ring of minute numerals arranged in a perfect circle stood out as clearly as printer's type. "Observe, Watson," he said, comparing the spacing with a tracing he had taken of Sir Septimus's safe dial. Our criminal possessed not only the combination, but had practiced its manipulation sufficiently to leave these telltale impressions. The Prussian blue compound, when heated, creates a perfect negative impression of the most frequently touched numbers. From his waistcoat, he produced the shred of crimson silk, moistening it with a chemical reagent that drew forth a dull sparkle from the interwoven metallic threads. When touched to a stick of whitening, it left a chalky smear that would not dust away. Theatrical costume material, Watson. The sort employed in music hall performances, where gaslight must catch and reflect from the performer's attire. Our analysis was interrupted by Lestrade's urgent arrival, bearing a telegram whose brevity conveyed immediate alarm. Another collector of Eastern curiosities, Lord Eversley of Fitzroy Square, had been robbed within the hour, under circumstances that mirrored our Cheney Walk mystery with disturbing precision. The servants had heard whispered conversation, a low voice commenting upon the dust of empires, followed by the familiar thud and discovery of an opened dispatch box. Most significantly, a child's automaton had recently been presented to his lordship's granddaughter by a German gentleman anxious for recognition of his novelties. "The same brain, Inspector," Holmes declared, reaching for his Inverness cape. "Our adversary grows bold through success, believing his method invisible and therefore repeatable. That vanity shall prove our ally." The Britannia Theatre blazed with gaslight against the fog-shrouded evening, its crowd's warm breath creating clouds of vapor in the chill air. Holmes, having transformed himself with subtle theatrical makeup into a respectable clerk of modest circumstances, purchased gallery tickets and allowed the eager crush to bear us aloft. The playbill advertised, among other marvels, a specialty act styled The Whispering Automaton by one Mr. Marius Marr. "Mark the vowels when he speaks," Holmes murmured as the curtain rose. "You shall hear our accent, that is neither wholly English nor foreign, the trained neutrality of a professional ventriloquist who must render his voice a blank canvas for other characters." The performance proved revelatory. A pale gentleman with carefully waxed mustaches stepped into the calcium light beside a porcelain-faced doll seated upon a velvet stool. When he lifted his hand, the toy's chest fluttered as it emitted whispers that carried with unnatural clarity to our elevated position. "Who is among us?" it said in those precise, clipped tones we had heard described. "Only those who listen." The vowels matched exactly Sir Septimus's account, and when Mr. Marr addressed the doll as little companion, I started at the familiar inflection. Between acts, Holmes vanished twice into the theatre's depths, returning with a faint odor of scene paint and rope about his clothing. "Gutta-percha tubes behind the wing flats, Watson," he reported quietly. "A box of blank wax cylinders in the property room bearing labels in continental script. Upon a pulley above the prompt corner, another smear of our ubiquitous blue compound." He studied the stage with predatory patience. Observe Marr's right cuff. Crimson silk thread. Metallic, designed to catch the gaslight. Our theatrical and mechanical elements have indeed joined forces. Before the evening's final act, an usher brought Lestrade an urgent message. Herr Gruber had been discovered unconscious in the New North Road, struck down and robbed, though mercifully alive. A witness had observed two men carrying a suspicious bundle into a cab bound for Hoxton Market. Holmes received this intelligence with that peculiar stillness indicating rapid mental calculation rather than surprise. "When an instrument has served its purpose, it is discarded," he observed grimly. "The bundle will contain cylinders, mechanical components, and whatever evidence might compromise the master more than his tool." Backstage investigation revealed Marr's dressing room standing in perfect order, washstand dry and looking-glass wiped clean. Yet, in the grate, wisps of smoke curled from the charred remains of cylinder labels, illegible save for the foreign characters of Gruber's name and a penciled notation. Holmes retrieved a final speck of blue compound from a trunk corner, examining it with satisfaction. Our adversary demonstrates remarkable mechanical aptitude combined with theatrical flair, Holmes observed as we departed into the fog-shrouded streets. "Such individuals do not steal merely for monetary gain, Watson, but for the intellectual gratification of constructing seemingly impossible puzzles. The theft itself is secondary to the elaborate staging of the insoluble crime." I had noticed during our theatre visit that Holmes seemed aware of observation from the shadows, though he made no direct acknowledgement of surveillance. His manner suggested we were being watched by professionals rather than casual observers, adding another layer of complexity to our already intricate investigation. "Tomorrow," Holmes announced as our hansom carried us through the thickening fog, "we shall provide Mr. Marr with a puzzle of our own construction. His psychological profile suggests he cannot resist examining any challenge to his perceived brilliance. We shall create an irresistible theatrical trap, one that appeals directly to his vanity while providing us the opportunity to observe him in action." The game had indeed escalated beyond mere criminal investigation into a deadly, serious contest of wits between Holmes and a master of mechanical and theatrical deception. As London's fog swirled about our hansom, I sensed we approached the crucial confrontation that would determine whether we had successfully unmasked a brilliant criminal or merely discovered another layer in an even more complex conspiracy. The morning would bring the final act of this elaborate drama, with Holmes preparing to match theatrical illusion against theatrical illusion in a battle of minds that would test all his deductive powers and perhaps place us in greater peril than any case we had previously undertaken. The morning brought with it that peculiar intensity I'd observed in Holmes before his most audacious stratagems, his movements precise and calculated as he orchestrated what he termed a theatrical trap for a theatrical mind. By 8 o'clock, he had dispatched 3 carefully worded advertisements to publications frequented by mechanical enthusiasts and theatrical professionals, each containing a subtle challenge designed to pierce Marr's professional vanity. Our adversary cannot resist examining any mechanism that claims superiority to his own artistry, Holmes explained, sealing the final envelope. We shall provide him with a puzzle so intriguing that intellectual pride overrides criminal caution. The bait Holmes devised demonstrated his profound understanding of criminal psychology. Through his theatrical contacts, he procured a modest house in Bloomsbury whose study contained a modern Milner's safe of impressive appearance, though one whose combination he had carefully predetermined. More significantly, he arranged for the loan of precision mechanical components from Professor Mortimer's collection, devices whose apparent sophistication would appeal directly to Marr's expertise in clockwork mechanisms. Holmes spent the remainder of the morning in meticulous preparation of what he called a stage worthy of our performer. The safe's dial received a nearly invisible coating of photographic reagent that would darken under the warmth of repeated handling, while the handle bore a thin film of Prussian blue compound mixed with a slow evaporating oil. Within the safe, rather than genuine valuables, Holmes placed a weighted parcel and a small glass vial of chemical developer positioned to shatter if the contents were hastily seized. "If he attempts his familiar methods," Holmes observed, adjusting a spring-loaded mechanism behind the wainscoting, "he will leave us a complete record of his techniques while providing evidence of his guilt." The house itself was prepared with the thoroughness of a military operation. Holmes positioned a delicate wire system that would signal any manipulation of the study's hidden passages, while installing acoustic tubes that would carry whispered conversations to our observation post in the adjacent chamber. Most ingeniously, he created what appeared to be a standard mechanical toy upon the study shelf, but one whose internal mechanisms had been modified to record rather than merely reproduce sound. Lestrade arrived at noon with 2 plainclothes constables, whom Holmes positioned with characteristic precision. "Remember, Inspector, we are dealing with a mind that delights in mechanical complexity and theatrical presentation. He will not simply break and enter, but will wish to demonstrate his artistry, even to an unseen audience." Our vigil began as the afternoon fog gathered, transforming London into that familiar maze of shadows and muffled sounds. Holmes, disguised as a scholarly gentleman of modest means, assumed the role of the house's temporary occupant, while I concealed myself behind a carefully arranged screen that permitted observation of the entire study. The waiting proved interminable, each sound from the street causing us to tense with anticipation. As evening approached, bringing with it the dense fog that seemed to muffle even thought itself, a figure detached from the swirling mist outside our windows. The man who approached moved with that distinctive combination of theatrical grace and professional caution we had observed at the Britannia Theatre. He circled the building twice, his keen eyes cataloguing every window and shadow, with the instinctive awareness of someone accustomed to both performing for and evading observation. Ma's method of entry proved everything Holmes had anticipated. Rather than forcing the lock, he produced a selection of delicate instruments and worked with the patient skill of a master craftsman. The door yielded silently to his ministrations, opening just wide enough to admit his slight frame before closing again with barely a whisper of sound. Once inside, his behavior revealed the methodical mind Holmes had predicted. He moved through the house with systematic precision, testing floorboards for creaks, examining window latches, and pausing frequently to listen with the concentrated attention of a musician detecting discord in a familiar melody. When he finally entered the study, his eyes immediately fixed upon the safe with unmistakable professional interest. "Observe his technique, Watson." Holmes breathed through our concealed speaking tube. "He approaches the mechanism not as a common thief, but as one craftsman examining another's work." Ma's fingers traced the safe's surface with delicate precision, his touch revealing intimate familiarity with such devices. From his coat, he withdrew a small leather case containing instruments whose purpose became clear as he began his methodical assault upon the combination lock. The Prussian blue compound began its silent work, marking his fingertips with traces that would prove impossible to explain away. Yet even as our trap closed around him, I detected in Ma's manner a subtle wariness that suggested he sensed the elaborate nature of the stage upon which he performed. His head turned occasionally toward shadows that held no threat, and his fingers paused in their work as though listening for sounds that existed only in his imagination. Holmes's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as our quarry committed himself irrevocably to the crime, unaware that every movement was being recorded by mechanisms far more sophisticated than any he had encountered in his previous theatrical presentations. Ma's approach to the safe demonstrated the methodical precision Holmes had anticipated, his slender fingers moving across the dial with the delicate touch of a master pianist testing familiar keys. The photographic reagent began its silent work, darkening imperceptibly under the warmth of repeated contact, while the Prussian blue compound transferred its invisible testimony to his fingertips with each careful manipulation. From our concealed observation point, Holmes watched with predatory stillness, his eyes cataloguing every movement as evidence accumulated against our theatrical adversary. The modified toy upon the shelf seemed to draw Ma's professional attention even as he worked. His gaze flickered toward it repeatedly, and I detected in his manner that peculiar mixture of curiosity and competitive assessment that marked him as a craftsman evaluating another's work. When the safe's final tumbler clicked into position and the heavy door swung open with satisfying precision, Ma paused to examine our mechanical bait more closely. "Interesting craftsmanship," he murmured in those carefully modulated tones, lifting the doll and turning it over in his hands. His fingers found the concealed recording mechanism with the instinctive skill of long experience, and a faint smile touched his lips as he recognized both its purpose and its limitations, though hardly a match for true artistry. It was precisely at this moment of professional vanity that Holmes chose to reveal himself, stepping from the shadows with theatrical timing that matched our adversary's own sense of drama. "Mr. Ma," he said quietly, "I believe you have found our little mechanical puzzle satisfactory." Ma started violently, the doll slipping from his grasp to land upon the carpet with a muffled thud. Yet his recovery was remarkable, demonstrating that same theatrical composure we had observed at the Britannia. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I presume?" he said, straightening with dignity despite the compromising circumstances. "Your reputation for dramatic timing proves well deserved." Holmes moved into the gaslight with deliberate precision, his keen eyes noting the telltale stains upon Ma's fingertips and the chemical evidence that had accumulated during his careful manipulation of our prepared safe. "As does yours for mechanical ingenuity, Mr. Ma. The Prussian blue upon your hands, the photographic impressions upon the dial, and the recording device you have so obligingly activated will provide compelling testimony to your methods." "Will they indeed?" Ma's voice carried genuine curiosity rather than concern, as though discussing a fascinating technical problem with a respected colleague. "And what methods might those be, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes began that systematic dissection of evidence which had illuminated so many seemingly impossible mysteries. The modification of innocent toys into instruments of espionage and theft, the use of acoustic tubes and concealed passages to create the illusion of supernatural communication, the patient observation required to determine safe combinations through chemical marking compounds. Your performance at Malden House was masterful, Mr. Ma, but not invisible to eyes trained in observation. As Holmes spoke, I noticed Ma's gaze moving subtly about the room, cataloguing exits and obstacles with the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to both performance and escape. His right hand drifted toward his coat pocket, where the faint outline of some concealed object suggested he retained resources for extricating himself from this theatrical trap. "You flatter me, Mr. Holmes," Ma replied, his accent carrying that distinctive precision we had noted throughout our investigation. "Though I confess myself curious about your reconstruction of events, the locked room at Cheney Walk presented certain technical challenges that required innovative solutions." "Indeed it did," Holmes agreed, moving closer while maintaining careful watch on Ma's hands. The silk line system for manipulating the doll's position, the weighted object suspended to deliver an incapacitating blow, the spring steel slip for securing the door bolt from outside the room. Each element demonstrated considerable mechanical sophistication. Ma's eyes brightened with what appeared to be genuine pleasure at having his artistry recognized and understood. "You appreciate the elegance of the solution, then? The intellectual satisfaction of creating an apparently impossible crime, one that challenges the conventional mind while remaining perfectly logical to those who understand the underlying principles." "I appreciate the ingenuity," Holmes replied carefully, "though I cannot admire its application. Where are the Murshidabad Star and Sir Septimus's papers, Mr. Ma?" For the first time, our adversary's composure showed signs of strain. His hand moved more definitively toward his pocket, and his eyes took on the alert wariness of a performer sensing hostile elements in his audience. "Safely stored, Mr. Holmes, against the possibility of such conversations as this." Holmes had positioned himself between Ma and the door, while through our speaking tube I could hear Lestrade's men taking positions in the corridor beyond. Yet something in Ma's manner suggested he retained confidence in his ability to escape even this carefully prepared trap. His fingers found whatever object lay concealed in his coat, and his stance shifted subtly into the balanced posture of someone preparing for sudden action. "The game has been most stimulating, Mr. Holmes," Ma said with evident sincerity, "but I fear our performance must now move to its next act. The evening's entertainment is far from concluded." With theatrical flourish, he produced a small glass sphere from his pocket and held it poised above the study floor. The threat was clear, another of those phosphorus flares that could blind and disorient us long enough for his escape. Holmes tensed, his hand moving toward his service revolver, while the crucial moment of our elaborate trap hung balanced on the edge of success or failure. The confrontation had reached its critical juncture, with the master detective and the theatrical criminal facing each other in the gaslit study, each measuring the other's capabilities while the fog-shrouded London night waited to conceal whatever dramatic conclusion their contest of wits might produce. The glass sphere poised in Ma's fingers represented his final theatrical gesture, Yet Holmes had anticipated even this dramatic flourish. With swift precision, he swept the heavy woolen coverlet he had positioned upon the chair arm for precisely this contingency. The phosphorus sphere struck the thick folds instead of the floor, emitting only a spiteful hiss before Holmes ground it harmlessly into the carpet beneath his boot. The acrid scent that followed spoke of chemicals rendered impotent by his foresight. In the same fluid motion, Holmes snapped open his dark lantern, directing its concentrated beam directly into Ma's eyes. Our adversary flinched at the sudden brilliance, his carefully balanced stance disrupted just long enough for Holmes to call out sharply, "Now, Lestrade!" The study door burst inward as the inspector's men rushed forward, their practiced efficiency overwhelming Ma's desperate attempt to reach the window. He discovered, as Holmes had intended, that both sashes had been discreetly secured during our afternoon preparations. Cornered and outnumbered, Ma's theatrical training served him well as he accepted the inevitable with professional dignity, offering no further resistance as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "A masterful counter-performance, Mr. Holmes," Ma observed, his voice retaining that careful precision even in defeat. "You anticipated my methods with admirable thoroughness." Holmes straightened his coat and retrieved his magnifying glass, his keen eyes already cataloguing the evidence that would seal our case. "Your artistry was considerable, Mr. Ma, but you made the fundamental error of all theatrical performers. You could not resist an audience, and audiences invariably include those capable of understanding the mechanisms behind the illusion." As Lestrade's men conducted their systematic search, Holmes began the detailed exposition that would illuminate every aspect of this intricate crime. "Inspector, the mystery of Sir Septimus Robotham's locked study, and indeed Lord Eversley's similar misfortune, demonstrates the remarkable convergence of mechanical genius and theatrical artistry. Mr. Ma here is no common thief, but a master of what we might term impossible crimes. Constructed not merely for monetary gain, but for the intellectual satisfaction of creating seemingly insoluble puzzles." Holmes moved to the prepared safe, indicating the now visible traces of chemical evidence upon its surface. "Observe the Prussian blue compound upon Mr. Ma's fingertips, transferred from our prepared handle and now fixed permanently by the photographic developer released when he opened the safe. This same compound, obtained from H. March & Company's gas-fitting establishment, was applied to Sir Septimus's safe dial to record the most frequently touched numbers. Pressed tinfoil, when heated, created perfect negative impressions of the combination. The search of Ma's person revealed the complete apparatus of his trade. Delicate lock-picking instruments, silk lines invisible beyond arm's length, blank wax cylinders, and the crucial stethoscopic diaphragm for detecting tumbler movements. Most tellingly, they discovered a detailed map marking the residences of prominent collectors, confirming that our two robberies represented merely the opening performances of a much more ambitious criminal season. "The locked room itself was never actually entered during the commission of either crime," Holmes continued, his explanation weaving together every clue we had discovered. "The illusion of conversation was created through acoustic tubes, like the gutta percha fragment we found, carrying Ma's voice from concealed positions. The modified dolls, equipped with secondary recording cylinders prepared by the unfortunate Herr Gruber, provided the mysterious whispered responses that so unsettled Sir Septimus. Holmes demonstrated the mechanical principles with the precision of a university lecturer. The doll's apparent movement from shelf to table was accomplished through silk lines manipulated from the adjacent storage chamber, while the incapacitating blow was delivered by a weighted object suspended on a similar pulley system. The door was secured afterward using a spring steel slip inserted through the frame, creating the perfect illusion of an internally locked room." Lestrade nodded with growing understanding. "And Mr. Basil Harcourt's convenient alibi?" "A deliberate misdirection, Inspector. Ma required a plausible suspect to occupy official attention while his true methods remained unexamined. The theatrical accent that both Sir Septimus and the parlour maid described matches precisely Mr. Marr's professional voice, trained to assume any character required by his performances. At this crucial moment, a constable returned from the Britannia Theatre bearing a small parcel wrapped in oiled silk. Within its tinfoil folds lay the Murshidabad star, its blue depths catching the gaslight and casting back cold fire. Even Marr could not suppress a flicker of professional pride at seeing his prize recovered from its ingenious hiding place within the calcium lamp housing. "The star shines brightest in darkness," Holmes quoted with satisfaction. "Your doll's cryptic message was nothing more than a craftsman's vanity, directing us to the very location where you had concealed your prize among the theatre's lighting apparatus." As the stolen correspondence and remaining evidence were catalogued, Marr maintained that peculiar composure which marked him as a performer, even in disgrace. "You have unravelled my humble performance with admirable precision, Mr. Holmes. I confess myself impressed by your theatrical sensibilities." "Drama belongs upon the stage, Mr. Marr," Holmes replied quietly. "In the realm of criminal justice, we deal exclusively in facts." The morning fog was lifting as our prisoner was transported to Scotland Yard, while the recovered valuables were prepared for return to their rightful owners. Holmes remained thoughtfully silent during our journey back to Baker Street, his mind clearly processing implications that extended beyond the immediate resolution of our case. "The mechanical skill required for such elaborate deceptions," I observed, "represents years of dedicated study and considerable natural talent." Holmes nodded gravely. "Indeed, Watson, when such capabilities are turned to criminal purposes, they create mysteries that challenge even the most systematic investigation. Yet, as we have seen, no illusion, however ingenious, can long withstand the patient application of logical analysis and careful observation." The case of the toy that whispered back had reached its satisfying conclusion, with every mysterious element explained and every clue revealed to have played its essential part in the greater pattern of deception. As London awakened around us, I reflected upon the remarkable convergence of mechanical artistry and criminal intent that had created one of our most intellectually challenging investigations, now resolved through Holmes's characteristic blend of scientific method and intuitive brilliance. The morning sun had burned away the last traces of London fog as Holmes and I returned to Baker Street, the satisfaction of a case well concluded warming us more effectively than the November air ever could. Yet even as we settled before our familiar hearth, Holmes maintained that restless energy which indicated his mind was still processing implications that extended far beyond Marr's immediate capture. Mrs. Hudson's announcement of visitors interrupted our post-case analysis, and we were surprised to receive both Sir Septimus Robotham, looking considerably more robust without his bandage, and Herr Gruber himself, much recovered from his injuries and bearing an expression of profound contrition. The elderly toy-maker's account revealed the subtle psychological manipulation by which Marr had transformed innocent mechanical skill into criminal instrument. "He approached me as a fellow craftsman," Gruber explained in his careful English, "praising my work and commissioning what seemed harmless theatrical novelties. The acoustic cylinders, the timing mechanisms, the modified recording apparatus, only gradually did I comprehend their true criminal purpose. When I began to suspect and attempted to withdraw my cooperation, he became most threatening." Holmes nodded with characteristic understanding. "You were neither the first craftsman he approached, nor would you have been the last, Herr Gruber. The theatrical criminal requires a supporting cast, and Marr possessed considerable talent for recruiting unwitting accomplices through appeals to professional vanity." Sir Septimus then revealed information that cast our recent victory in an even more significant light. "Mr. Holmes, among my recovered papers were letters detailing the security arrangements of a dozen prominent collectors throughout London. Marr was preparing what can only be described as a systematic campaign of impossible crimes, each more elaborate than the last. The subsequent search of Marr's lodgings, conducted with Lestrade's characteristic thoroughness, confirmed these fears. Hidden beneath loose floorboards lay detailed architectural plans of numerous London residences, each annotated with mechanical observations regarding safe locations, acoustic properties, and potential concealment points. Most disturbing was a leather-bound journal containing what could only be described as a criminal's manual, detailing methods for creating impossible crimes through systematic application of theatrical and mechanical principles. The man was constructing a new science of criminal deception, Holmes observed, examining the journal's meticulous entries. Each successful crime would have provided refinements for the next, creating an escalating series of mysteries that might well have baffled conventional investigation indefinitely. As our visitors departed with renewed expressions of gratitude, I reflected upon the intricate web of deception we had unraveled. It was his vanity that proved his undoing, Holmes. His inability to resist demonstrating his superior understanding of mechanism and illusion. Precisely, Watson. The moment he lifted our modified doll, professional curiosity overriding criminal caution, he sealed his fate. Holmes reached for his clay pipe, his eyes holding that familiar gleam of intellectual satisfaction. Every detail contributed to the whole. The Prussian blue compound became our silent witness, marking both the combination numbers and the perpetrator's hands. The sawdust revealed the precision boring required for hidden passages. Even that peculiar accent proved to be the trained neutrality of a professional ventriloquist. Holmes moved to the window, gazing out at the clear London sky where the fog had finally lifted completely. The theatrical mind, Watson, cannot resist an audience capable of appreciating its artistry. Ma's elaborate mechanical preparations, his acoustic illusions, his weighted pendulum system, all were merely stage props in a grand performance designed to confound lesser minds while validating his own genius. "And his hiding place for the Murshidabad star?" I prompted, still marveling at the solution's elegance. "The star shines brightest in darkness." A final, self-congratulatory flourish directing us to the calcium lamp housing at the Britannia Theatre. Such vanity compels the criminal to leave a signature, which becomes, to the attentive eye, a map to his undoing. Holmes drew thoughtfully on his pipe, the smoke curling upward in the still air. This case demonstrates once again that the most profound deceptions are built upon simple principles hidden by misdirection and the failure of ordinary minds to look beyond surface appearances. No illusion, however ingenious, can long withstand the patient application of logical analysis and systematic observation. As afternoon shadows lengthened across our sitting room, Holmes settled back into contemplative silence, his keen eyes already scanning some distant horizon for the next challenge. The case of the toy that whispered back had reached its satisfying conclusion, with every mysterious element explained and justice served. Yet in the great game between order and chaos, as Holmes was fond of observing, each victory merely prepared the ground for the next intellectual battle.